When the Americans began bombing Japan from heights that no Japanese fighter could reach, the Imperial Army engineers decided it was a trick. They didn't believe that such an aircraft could even exist. But when the wreckage of the B-29 fell to the ground and the Japanese saw how it was constructed, they realized that the war was already lost. The illusion of invincibility. At the beginning of the war, Japan considered itself invincible. Its fleet dominated the Pacific Ocean, and its army went from victory to victory. Engineers were confident that their technology was the best in the world. The Zero was fast, maneuverable, and almost invulnerable. Tanks, ships, aircraft, everything seemed perfect. And America? Japanese propaganda portrayed it as a country of lazy, inept consumers. The Japanese believed that the Americans would not be able to withstand a real war. But everything changed when the B-29 Superfortress, a super-heavy bomber that the Japanese could not even dream of, appeared over Tokyo for the first time. Devil planes. In the summer of 1944, the first B-29s took off from bases in India and China. They climbed to an altitude of more than 10 kilometers, where Japanese fighters simply could not reach them. They carried up to 9 tons of bombs and flew 6,000 kilometers without refueling. These planes appeared suddenly on Japanese radar. They flew so high that anti-aircraft guns were almost useless. At first, the Japanese decided that this was new American propaganda. A plane the size of a house, capable of flying from Saipan to Tokyo? Impossible. But then, explosions. City after city was reduced to ashes, and no Japanese fighter plane could stop them. When the wreckage fell to the ground one day, one of the B-29s was shot down and crashed on Japanese territory. Engineers from the Imperial Army arrived at the scene. They expected to see a monster, a complex, cumbersome mechanism. But when they began to dismantle the wreckage, they were shocked. Every bolt, every seam, every panel was perfectly fitted. Everything was as simple, logical, and reliable as possible. The wires were neatly laid out, the tubes were labeled, and each node was easily accessible. The Japanese couldn't believe it. Their own aircraft were built by hand, with individually fitted parts. Here, however, was mass production, but with the precision of jewelry work. One of the engineers wrote in his diary, "We didn't lose in the sky. We lost in the workshop technologies they didn't have." The B-29 was an engineering marvel. It had a pressurized cabin. The crew could breathe at an altitude of 10 kilometers. Radio-controlled turrets with computers. Each could automatically lock onto a target. To the Japanese, it sounded like science fiction. And this was in 1944. Meanwhile, Japanese factories were still operating with 1930s technology. Hand riveting, paper templates, outdated engines. When engineers realized that America was building 4 such planes a day, they realized that even if they managed to shoot down one, 10 new ones would arrive tomorrow. March 9th, 1945, was the most terrifying night in Tokyo's history. 334 B-29s took off from the Mariana Islands. Each carried incendiary bombs. The city was hot, windy, and full of wooden houses. When the explosions began, the flames turned Tokyo into a sea of fire. Everything was burning. The asphalt melted. People ran through the streets, which were turning into rivers of flame. More people died in one night than in the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. And at the airfields, the B-29s were already being prepared for their next flight. After the war, when the Americans allowed Japanese engineers to study the Allies' technology, they saw the B-29 up close for the first time. Not in smoke, not among the rubble. Their faces showed a mixture of amazement and respect. They recorded everything. They studied the materials, systems, and solutions. It was then that Japanese industry realized that the secret of America's strength lay not in its weapons, but in its approach. Standardization, mass production, simplicity, organization of labor. Many of those engineers later created what the world would come to know as the Japanese economic miracle. The very people who were amazed by the B-29 were producing Toyota, Sony, and Mitsubishi 20 years later. In 1945, Japanese engineers called the B-29 the aircraft of the gods. But in reality, it was not a gift from heaven. It was the fruit of intelligence, organization, and faith in human potential. The irony of fate is that defeat by such machines taught Japan to build its own, and never to wage war again, but to compete with technology. Translated with DeepL.com, free version,